Thank you so much for joining us today. Our topic, we are going to be talking about spiritual abuse and empowering people that find themselves in challenging situations. And like many things, right? If you find yourself, hey, needing to stop the podcast and take a break, please feel free to do that. We just want to be very sensitive as, there might be some things that we're talking about that you feel triggered by. It's not our intention. We want to be able to just really give you some practical things that you can do if you find yourself in a really challenging situation. So I want to introduce you today to Stacey Wynn. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the work that you're doing is I know that this is a difficult topic. I know it's challenging, but I know that you are in the weeds, in the trenches with your clients. So I want to thank you for taking time to join us today.
It's such a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invitation.
So as we kick off, I know one of the questions that I often ask my guests is, then I know that you don't only work with people that are going through divorce, but what is something that you're doing to disrupt the divorce industry? And what I mean by that is challenging the status quo, doing things better and not just accepting, hey, that's how we've always done it.
Yeah, one of my sayings that I find myself saying a lot is that divorce heals broken homes. And I think in high conflict divorces, and the space that I've been working in over a decade now, is paired a lot with evangelicalism and toxic theology. And there's a whole stigma around women who seek divorce in ways that just aren't true and accurate to scripture. So part of what I am really hoping to disrupt is this idea that you cannot be a woman of faith and pursue divorce.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we unpack that today, let's kind of kick off with a little bit about how you got started doing this work and maybe some of the things that you're seeing that, inspires you to do the work that you're doing.
I don't think I will ever stop doing this work because it truly has been something that continues to just bring me joy to be able to come alongside women who were at a place and are at a place where I found myself once. So I came out of a destructive marriage myself and began that process back in 2016. And at the time, I was also in transition. I had a very busy corporate career that I had had for about 20 years. And that was kind of coming to an end because of some business decisions. So I was navigating that as a leader with a lot of change, recognizing that my marriage was in a bad place. And I served in ministry in various contexts and found that some of the patterns I was seeing, those destructive patterns that I saw in my own marriage, I was also seeing in leadership and churches. So this was a period of time for me over the course of a couple of years where I just saw destructive patterns all over the place and was trying to figure out what that meant. And what I did discover is that my faith really shifted tremendously during my separation and divorce. And it kind of felt like I lost my footing and was quite isolated. In fact, I just remember thinking, there's no one that understands this. No one's ever going to understand this. I was just so immersed in the culture. So as I became more familiar with the landscape and recognized that there were some resources out there, I was already pursuing a second career as a coach and consultant. And for me, there was nothing I wanted more than to take my faith back. And for me, for my personality, which is different than others, I became very assertive about learning what I needed to learn and doing what I needed to do to feel empowered again in my faith. And then that slowly led to partnering with others to do the same.
I love that. I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's been so many times where, women reach out and they do feel alone and are looking for guidance and direction. And I think it's unfortunate because I think the church has a lot of unhealthy ways that they deal with certain things. And I always believe that it's bad tools. People don't know how to do certain things or deal with certain concerns or issues. And so they either avoid it or they have unhealthy ways to deal with certain things. And I remember early on in my career, I had a pastor ask me, Rhonda, do you feel any internal disconnect with helping women that are going through divorce? And I said unequivocally, no, like absolutely not, because I see how challenging it is, how broken they feel, how overwhelmed. And I'm like, I would rather be the person standing in the gap for them and I know you do too, to help them through that than to say, oh yeah, hey, I'm washing my hands of it. And I think we have a real opportunity to show God's love to women that are hurting because that's the source of what we're drawing from. I mean, I just love these women so much. Like, I just want them to feel that people care about them, that God loves them, and that they're not alone.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And basically, where a lot of churches start is one verse that's taken out of context that's not even relevant to women today, which is that God hates divorce. It's not an accurate translation, and it's not what the verse even means. And that's kind of the starting point for many women is the starting and stopping point. I just can't do it because I don't want God to hate me. It's just such a hard process to go through and to sort out, and doing it alone can be overwhelming when you're surrounded by people who want to send you uplifting verses and give you all the advice to stay in your marriage from a quote unquote scriptural perspective, but aren't willing to listen and really see things empathetically. And you talked about relationship, which I think is part of the issue. Relationships are difficult. And I think oftentimes we do not run into many people in our church communities who truly want relationship, which implies that they're going to listen. They're going to ask questions to understand. They're going to be with us and not try to fix us or have us conform to their way of doing things. And instead, what we find ourselves in is a place where we're asked to conform, and our lives become kind of facades in doing that. And we're faced with being in a transactional world. You do this and I'll do that. I'll fit in this way, I'll say this and I'll do that. So I'm sure I fit in. And that's not what relationship is. So as we're trying to figure out our way toward healthy relationships in many regards, part of that is sometimes leaving toxic church environment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I always tell people, like, I can just say from the 11 years in doing this work that God has never left the women that I'm working with. He's not like, hey, you're getting divorced. Peace out. See you later. That's not what happens. He shows up. He brings people into their path. He helps them feel peaceful and grounded. And again, a lot of times he's using people that are passionate about helping people in that space as the vessel to be able to do that. But I just think that's important because, again, I've never, ever seen where somebody is left destitute because, spiritually speaking, because God's given up on them.
Right. God never promises to fix things, but God promises to be with us.
Yeah.
And we are found by God in the wilderness.
Yeah.
It's where we end up in our
Yeah,
journey.
absolutely. And so if you're listening, I just want to let you know that we see you. God sees you right where you're at, and you're not alone. And so along those lines, I know there's kind of three key kind of practical things that leave our listeners with today. And the first thing is recognizing the need for community, but sometimes even the need for new community. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's so important to find a trusted community to be in. And sometimes that's one person or two people. But, I don't know where I would be without my community. And it's a community that is kind of judgment free from a faith perspective, being able to come alongside people who are open to talking about difficult things. Again, that's relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
People who are willing to come alongside and be in relationship. And for anyone who's searching for that and doesn't know where to find it, please reach out because I have lots of great ideas for you.
Yeah.
And another thing is just a reminder. We are told so many times, and it's true, that each of us has a personal relationship with God. And to me, that means that my faith journey and yours, Rhonda, are going to look entirely different, and that's okay. And God's big enough to manage all that. So being able to step into our own true, authentic faith, which changes over time. And as we go through things like loss and grief and divorce and even, joy and happiness and all of those things, our faith changes. And it's a normal and natural process. So knowing that we're on a spiritual journey is important, and knowing it's going to change over time is important. And remembering that we would have no faith if we had no doubt, because faith only exists in doubt. Faith doesn't exist in certainty. So the third thing I would say is emotional intelligence is key. And we spend a lot of time in high conflict divorces, I think, as women, focusing on what we wish our partners would do differently, or identifying themes or traits in our partners. And at some point, it makes sense to turn that curiosity and observation inward and to continue to work on our own self-awareness and self-development. And I think that's critical from a faith perspective too, when we consider that we do have the opportunity to grow through our wilderness journeys.
Yeah, absolutely. So, along the lines of emotional intelligence, right? Can you define that? Because I know what the word is, right? But it's mainly from like business related things. So, talk to us a little about what it is. And then, if you have any suggestions for maybe some tools that women could use to kind of explore that a little bit further.
Sure, sure. So, in addition to my private practice, I'm a full time corporate coaching consultant, and emotional intelligence is the number one sought after skill globally, especially since the pandemic. It's the capacity that we have not only to navigate our own emotional landscape, but to understand the ripple effect we're having on other people as we start to try to reach out and build relationships and continue to grow. Emotional intelligence is understanding our own emotional landscape, our triggers, being able to work with that information, and then build relationships and understand what healthy relationships look like. So, emotional intelligence outside of corporate America is the same. It is the ability to know and accept. And in Christian context, this is another tricky part because women are often told not to trust their hearts and not to trust their emotions. And that's absolutely incorrect. So, emotions are God given. They're like lights on a dashboard. All of our emotions tell us something. They're visiting us for a reason. They're giving us input and helpful information. So, what do we do to learn more about that? And I'll send you some resources that I usually link for people that I find really helpful, like Brené Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart. Daniel Goleman is the king of emotional intelligence. He's got lots of work out there. And then as a coach, I work with the IEQ-9. I'm a practitioner for that assessment and is the best thing I've found to help people see their emotional intelligence journey.
I love that. And I think taking advantage of some of these tools are super helpful. There's several assessments that I've taken over the years, not directly related to emotional intelligence, but I definitely want to. But like the Myers-Briggs or the DISC profile or, Strength Finder, the Gallup poll. There's a lot of assessments that over the years I've taken, and each of those provided another level of awareness, not only how I'm showing up, but gosh, how am I responding? Or if I notice that somebody needs communication this way, how do I flex to be able to do that? And I think those are all such important skills that bringing those into the environment where, hey, we are going to be going through a major life transition. How do we show up in a way that is thinking clearly and looking at things from other people's perspectives? And I think it just puts us in a really good position when we're going to be doing negotiating. And it probably is going to save us time, money, and energy, right? Because if we can show up in a way that's emotionally intelligent in working with difficult soon to be ex, our team, our attorneys, the people on our team, oh my goodness.
Right. The difficult soon to be ex is often shaping what we think about ourselves and has done that over time to the point that we're not even sure the strengths that we bring to the table and what is really true or not true about ourselves, or even if we know ourselves anymore.
Yeah.
So that is the journey, discovering sometimes or rediscovering who we are and reclaiming our agency. And that's key, not only in the divorce journey, but in our faith journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know we've covered a lot of ground in a really short period of time between, hey, the importance of having community, the importance of having relationships, not just transactions, transitionship, that's a mouthful, right? And then the need for, right, that emotional intelligence as we're navigating through this. And the thing that I love about all of these concepts related to what we talked about today is these are lifelong things, right? This isn't just for the divorce. These are things that are setting you up for this next chapter in an even better, more empowered, more self-aware way.
Absolutely. Yes.
So, as we wrap up our time, what words of encouragement would you have for our listeners based on our topic for today?
I would reiterate that divorce is scripturally appropriate. You don't have to balance everything against the biblical text. It doesn't make any sense when you think about it that you would open up an ancient text and find your exact life story in there. And I think it's important to remember that we have to apply the wisdom from that text into our lives. And that is what it means to rely on not only the text, but on the Spirit, and to continue to build out trusted resources that help us see that. So continuing to walk into our agency and what that's like in this phase. I don't feel good ever about taking one single verse out of the text except this one, because I use it as a guidepost. So the listeners can take it or leave it. But I like to remind myself from Romans 8 that nothing separates us from the love of God. And nothing means nothing. So our marital status doesn't separate us, our doubts, our questions, even if we decide that we have to leave church for a time, that doesn't separate us from God. Even if we feel like we're separated from God, I don't think that we in our human power have that capacity. And that's a lot to think about, but I think it's also encouraging and comforting in those times when we do feel great isolation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a great summary, a great place for us to wrap up our time and remember that, yeah, nothing means nothing.
Mhm.
It's going to separate us from the love of God. So I just want to thank you for, yeah, sharing with us your expertise today. We'll make sure that we include the resources that you've mentioned briefly. If somebody is looking at taking some of the emotional intelligence quizzes, assessments that you mentioned, we'll make sure we include those in the show notes. So be sure to check those out. And I want to thank you for spending time with us today.
Thanks, Rhonda. It was great to be here.